All right, folks, welcome back. It is me, Kent Lindstrom. I'm a venture capitalist, a partner at the venture capital firm 8-Bit Capital, a seed stage firm based in San Francisco, California, and I am the host of this podcast. And today we're going to be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, AI. I try to have a few people on focused on AI because that's become of a moment. And Richarrd Socher is a real guy when it comes to AI. The joke in venture capital is that all venture capitalists say three things about AI. Number one, they say it's a bubble, and I am uniquely able to spot bubbles. Sidebar: if anybody tells you that they can spot bubbles and they're not worth $1 billion, they can't really spot bubbles. Number two, they say no, but AI is actually really real. Underneath all of it, it's going to be a huge investing trend for the next 10 years. And number three, I've been investing in AI the whole time, even when my website said I was focused on Web3. Richarrd is not one of those guys. He is the real deal when it comes to AI, adjunct professor at Stanford, teaching about AI, formerly chief scientist at Salesforce, working on their AI platform, CEO of U.com, search engine, AI-based. And he is the co-founder of AIX Ventures, which is a AI-focused venture firm. And he's a fascinating guy, and you're going to really, if you're interested in AI, this is your podcast. Thanks for coming back. Richarrd Socher, my guest. This is the Something Ventured podcast. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today, Richarrd Socher. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. So Richarrd I guess I'll work from now backwards, the founder of AIX Ventures, the CEO of U.com, which is the next generation search engine, was the chief scientist at Salesforce, has served as an adjunct professor at Stanford. You've got a lot going on. You've done everything. You've done the academic thing. You've done the corporate thing. You've started your own company, and now you're a venture capitalist. Like, what's left?
Maybe start a university. Just kidding.
Exactly. So what started you down this path? So you start on the academic side. What did drive you into this area? Like, what was going on when you were a kid, or, of all the things you could do, how'd you end up here?
Yeah, in high school, I loved languages and I loved math, and they're actually quite different. And so they combine in computers, where you try to use math to describe this fuzzy object of human language. And really, when you think about it, math is this beautiful, always pretty correct set of formalisms that in theory should be correct also 1,000 light years in another direction. But language is this human-made construct where you have a couple of students or kids and they say YOLO, and now you have a new word, and now you have to figure out what that word means, And so I started studying linguistic computer science pretty much exactly 20 years ago, and then it got into computer vision, statistical pattern recognition, machine learning, and then I just fell in love. I just this is obviously the future of so many things. If I just got really good at machine learning, then I could have so much positive impact on natural language understanding, helping people communicate better and understand each other better, translation and so on, biology, visual understanding, robotics, all these things. But then I had sort of a moment of reckoning of machine learning at the time was very much like expert feature designing, plus some statistical learning on top to weigh those features and combine those features. And so I thought it would be even better if we could learn those features just from raw data. And that's when I was fortunate enough to discover neural networks. And then those neural networks led me to try to use those ideas of feature learning and neural networks for natural language processing, which almost no one was doing at the time. There may be 3 or 4 folks who are also on this, widely ignored by everyone else. But I thought, no, there's something here. And then eventually that took over the whole field of NLP.
Wow. And you say mathematics, was there a musical component at all or not? Like, sometimes people who like mathematics see something in music that resonates with them. Sometimes they don't, but I was just curious about that.
I do like music. I don't think I'm the most musical. I was a singer and bass player in a band during high school and early college for a couple of years, but I don't think it's where my talents lie.
All right. Okay. Was it a punk band? What kind of band?
We actually, because we didn't know anything, we did start it in punk, and then got a little more sophisticated and sort of yeah, a little bit of metal.
You just weren't mad at the Queen enough to keep it going. So
A little bit of grunge,
yeah,
Nirvana
of course.
inspired back in the day and stuff. So,
So what happened? So many people, and people all over the world from different levels of understanding listen to this podcast, but so many people are interested in AI now. Something that's been around for a long time. There was that whole period, I think, where we were chess, computers were going after each other, and I think the computers won. But what happened in the fall of last year that made every venture capitalist scrub the word Web3 from their website and replace it with
yeah.
AI? And every news report is about AI. What happened? Like AI didn't just emerge in the fall of last year, did it?
That's exactly right. Yeah, if you're in the field, you could see a very clear progression, but sometimes sort of stepwise little progressions at some point cross a threshold, and then all of a sudden people get it, and the technology having crossed the threshold starts to become a lot more useful. And so late last year, what happened was that OpenAI published a little demo. They've tried lots of other things before using like robotics hands to solve Rubik's cubes and playing Dota games and other things. But when they published this demo to let you communicate with a large language model, it clicked for so many other people. And we had already been using large language models inside U.com months before to generate code. And some people loved that feature, but it just really didn't take off anywhere near what ChatGPT did. And when you look at GPT, generative pre-trained transformers, all those things and the ideas had been around for many years. But what OpenAI did so cleverly is just take those existing ideas, not try to do a bunch of fancy math or on top of it and publish cool papers, but just scale it up massively more. And then indeed, interesting things emerged and more interesting things emerged. And so, I've invented prompt engineering in 2018, so several years before, and I was told that inspired some of the OpenAI folks also to work on GPT-1. But then they just kept on going, and that's really inspiring because when you keep on going, you keep burning many millions of dollars into training a model, and you don't know for sure if something really cool will happen.
Right.
It was just very inspiring to see, and it inspired then the whole rest of the world to start using that technology.
And OpenAI is kind of an interesting, as I understand it, there's Sam Altman, who's a very famous Silicon Valley guy, does it, and then is backed by some. I guess the kind of the astounding thing about it, it's not just a startup really that just started from someone's bedroom. They had an enormous amount of capital. It wasn't necessarily a for-profit model initially. So it seems like there was some alchemy that let that happen.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Sam, I think is the CEO, and so a lot of kudos goes to him. I'm also friends and used to share an office with Ilya Sutskever, who's their chief scientist, and I would put in terms of sort of the underlying ideas, most of the kudos to him. He's been thinking about generative models, large like language models, for a very long time, many years, and it used to start with little character language models, and they kind of produced something that sometimes looked like words and sentences a little bit, some phrases here and there that made sense. So he's been excited about that area for a very long time. And of course, Greg Brockman just is an amazing engineer and engineering leader. And there's so many other people. Obviously, it helped a lot that Elon Musk in the beginning lent his name to the organization and got a lot of people more excited to put more and more money into it,
Yeah.
to build great things.
And what do you make? I've just seen for the first time when I do a Google search, they've got it at the top now. It comes in and they say, "Hey, do you want an AI answer to this?" And here's been my experience. I like to kind of see what you think of this. When I've used Chat GPT or Bard, there's about a third of the time the search is it's just mind blowing. It's like the first time you see the internet, you just say, I just can't believe this isn't. I can't believe it. A third of the time, it doesn't really help. Like I'm just looking for tacos nearby, and I don't need to talk. Where's the closest taco place? And then a third of the time, it gives me this beautiful answer that's just weird. It's not true. Like I've had it on good authority that I founded Stripe in 2014, and I have nothing to do with Stripe. What's going on here? Like, what do you make of that experience? Where sometimes I'm like it's wrong, sometimes my mind is blown, sometimes I don't. I'd rather just have an good old fashioned search.
That you bring up a really good point, which is something that we're iterating a lot on at u.com too. Is like, when is chat the best experience? When do you just have what we call a quick navigational search? You just want to go to a website. When you want to have a maps kind of intent where you want to see the closest restaurant or something. When you just want to see the weather or stock price. So at u.com, what we did is we built a multimodal chatbot where if you ask for a stock price, we just show you a stock ticker. Because we've seen when we launched this late last year, just a few weeks after ChatGPT came out, we were the first in the world to connect a large language model to an internet search backend. And this is something that more and more LLM providers are realizing is a need now. And it's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. Because really, when you just ask a large language model, you can think of it kind of as like your forgetful grandfather. You can ask some questions and they're like, oh yeah, I remember this and that, but maybe the details are all a little bit off, and it doesn't quite remember all the exact details from like 20 years ago. And so why force the language model to try to memorize all of that? Plus, no one has yet figured out how to keep these large language models up to date so that every 5 minutes, some news article happens, LK99, some craziness in Russia and stuff like that. Like, you can't update your model with the news every couple minutes. So what ends up being needed is for almost all of these LMs is what we've innovated on at u.com, which is you have the retrieval backend, you search the internet for things, and then you give that as input to your large language model. And then you say, you now reason over all of these facts and then summarize them and then give us the answer.
So how do you compete? So there's different, there's startups where you start, a social network in your bedroom. And then there's like auto companies, which, you can't really just do a startup auto. You kind of need to have billions in capital. You have the startup, but the other people, Google, Microsoft, even OpenAI, companies with almost unlimited capital, most of which seems to be going to NVIDIA. How does a startup compete? Or is this not the area where a startup wins? I can't imagine you think that since you started u.com, but
Right.
where do you fit into this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways to think about that question. The one thing, of course, is that for us to win, we don't have to necessarily get the entirety of search market and destroy all of Google, right? Sure, it would be nice to be $1 trillion company, but we'll do well if we're like a multi-billion-dollar company. And the search engine market is so massive. There's so many billions of people searching the internet that having just 2 or 3% is a good start, right? And then maybe you can start, continue to grow from there. So that's one part of the answer. The other one is that Google is still quite stuck in the old ways, and they're not going to just switch to a completely new paradigm of searching. But we are seeing that there are a lot of users who enjoy a new and different paradigm now. And we've been exploring last year and the years before with a lot of changes. But whenever we're too different to Google, people are like, oh, I don't like it too much. For a while we had some horizontal scrolling, we had different apps like the web app where you just have web links, but then also Reddit app, and you can scroll to the right and see infinitely more details along that one dimension and slice of the internet. And while it garnered some interest from people, we couldn't really grow into millions and millions of users. Ever since we've launched UChat, we have grown into millions of users. And things were a little bit slower in the summer, which a lot of other folks also saw, but now are picking way back up. And so it's clear that there's something here and that there's a new way of searching that's emerging for a subset of users. And, similar to a lot of other trends in history, when you have so much money and like Google makes $500 million a day, right? It's very hard to just switch everything to this new system. You have to keep your old users happy. And so that's kind of the opportunity for a startup. At some point, everyone switched from MySpace to Facebook, not because Facebook did exactly what MySpace did and and did it better. They just were very different in their approach. And
Right.
likewise, we used to all Skype, and now we all Zoom. So sometimes things change.
Yeah. And what is the thing that you think is big enough that somebody would stop using, Google, the kind of good enough thing? What is the sort of magical thing that can happen when somebody uses u.com where people go, no, this is so different that I'm going to, Uber is so different from a taxi cab that I'm actually going to hop into a stranger's car. I'm making that one up, but what is the thing where people go, I'm going to u.com? Like that is actually, I didn't go to Bing when they had the pretty pictures over Google, but I'll go to u.com because of what's the thing I'm going to feel.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. Of course, right, like earlier this year, we're the only chat LM with the internet. So that brought a lot of people over with an internet connection. So that brought a lot of people over. Now, that has been copied by a lot of big and small players. So that's less of a recent now. Now it's just the chat quality and the fact that you have the ability to ask follow-up questions, get explanations for a lot of complex things. You can learn a lot of things and just have this more personal assistant feel to it. And then, of course, yeah, we're going to release in coming quarters more and more new differentiating features that take a little bit for your small startup, but there will be more and more innovations that come in. And really, u.com is kind of your one place where you can chat and search, learn about things, and also generate new artifacts like images. You search for images, you can't find the image, you can just generate it right there.
Right. And why is the chat part of it important? I mean, if you had a search that gave you some magical answer, or you give it a command, just a regular command to write you a screenplay, is there something that our brains have gotten locked into because it started with a company called Chat GPT that chat has to be part of it? Or is that just a kind of where we are now, and in 6 months we won't even be thinking about the chat part of it?
Yeah, I mean, OpenAI launched ChatGPT, and that certainly galvanized a lot of people, right? And they have many millions of users. To us, we've been excited about what we call summarization for a long time. It's in fact, u.com's official corporate name is Suzy Inc. for summarization search, because that is ultimately where we think the future is going. I don't think the future is a list of blue links, and we've shown that last year, and I think the world is kind of starting to really get behind that. Now, it's just also helpful if you ask a complex question, you want to learn, like, what is LK99? What's a superconductor? Oh, what's diamagnetism? Oh, what's like the Meissner effect? And just like you learn more and more, and it's just helpful for that experience to have the context of your previous questions. And on Google, every time you make a new query, there's no more context, right? It's just a new world, a new question. And so that is just a really helpful interface. And I don't think chat is essentially a way to make computers communicate with people much more like people you communicate with other people, rather than how people communicate nowadays with computers. So chat is the more natural interface that brings computers closer to human communication styles. And so I don't think that will go away. I don't think that's a hype, because people are chatting with each other for millions or at least hundreds of thousands of years. And so, I don't think that will ever go away as sort of a hype bubble.
Do you think Google is vulnerable in any sense of that word because of this transition and them being stuck pretty hard to turn off $500 million a day? You probably get promoted for saying, hey, I add another link, we'll make $600 million a day. And
I mean, that's what they've been doing, right? When they were the only search engine in town, like the main innovations we've seen like every 2 or 3 years is like, instead of 2 ads, now it's 3 ads in the beginning of the page. Now it's 4 ads in the beginning. Like sometimes it's like the entire first page on your screen is just ads. And then you scroll down. And then of course you have the privacy invasion too, which we're also doing better. And we're committing to never doing retargeting and targeted ads like that. So there's a bunch of things that you can do better that rub some people the wrong way. DuckDuckGo, for instance, also has a reasonable amount of search traffic and is a fairly large multi-billion-dollar company. And so, yeah, there are clearly areas where some people want a different solution. Now, Google is like as big of a monopoly as they come in the history of technology. Yep. It's not going to happen overnight. And maybe at some point, regulators do realize the problems that exist here that hurt overall the consumer experience. Of course, as Google has gotten so much money, they don't really know what to do with it anymore, right? They're hiring a lot of people just to make them not go anywhere and do anything else. And so that will take some time. When you pay Apple $20 billion in 1 year just to be the default, no one spends that much money without knowing why, right? Yeah. And so the reason here is that the estimates vary, but somewhere around 80% of people never change a default on any of their devices. Yeah. They get the devices and they just use what comes with the device. Unless it's really, really bad and they like try to make a change. Yeah. So if you're that default on mobile Safari, for instance, from Apple gets 20 billion to not build their own search engine and discourage them from that to make a lot of money. Right. Google gets all these default behavior folks. You're not going to be able to convince people to change their settings. Some people just don't understand settings on computers and phones. And so, there's a lot of entrenched kind of monopoly behavior here, and that won't change overnight. So you got to be in it because you're really excited about search, which we are.
So where'd the hallucinations come from? Like when you ask it something and you just get this weird, correct but wrong but interesting answer. Like what is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So large language models are essentially large neural network models that predict the next token in an input sequence. And when that input sequence is amino acids, they will predict beautiful proteins that I think will change all of medicine. And there are new proteins that don't exist in nature, but they follow the grammar of proteins, which is amazing because humans don't understand the grammar of proteins. When it comes to English language, of course, we all have very strong preconceived notions of what that sequence should be like. And now the grammar is mostly correct. It understood the syntax of the English language, and it doesn't make mistakes there anymore. But when you think about it, it's very hard for a single model that is just trained to predict the next word to always say all the right things. Because maybe you're trying to write a novel and you're trying to like come up with new ideas that don't exist, and the model doesn't know exactly what state you're in. That being said, there's amazing and interesting things that happen when you learn to predict the next word on billions and billions of sequences. You actually end up learning a whole model of the world. Here's how. Imagine you try to predict the next word in a sentence. I was in New York and I was driving north too. Now, just to predict the next word after that phrase, to be maybe Yale, you put some probability in Yale, you put some probability of Boston, maybe some in Montreal. And then, it's statistically speaking, will be more often correct to say Boston because most people probably commute from New York north towards Boston. Now, to understand all of that, you had to essentially build a little world geographical model just to make sure that one word prediction is like assigning the right probabilities to the right sequence of cities. And so as you learn this, the model tries, given its context, to build the next best words. And so that is sort of the foundation of these models. But then they're also trained to be good conversationalists, to be interesting, to not just be like, how can I get from New York to Boston? And it says train.
Right.
And you're like, okay, right. And so one of the innovations for inflection, for instance, another large language model is to just be trained to always ask a follow-up question, which you can, do with GPT-3 also. But lots of language models, you can just kind of encourage the model to always ask a follow-up question and to keep engaging the person. Now, as you veer away from just like predict the next word in a sequence, and you try to also be entertaining, that adds some extra complexity. And so basically, ultimately, these models build a world model and try to be good conversationalists, but they have no inherent sense, no logical sense of the truth. They are statistical models, and you can sample from the same model 5 different answers, and it'll tell you 5 different things, unless you prime the prompt with a retrieval backend, which is what we've innovated on at U.com and continuing to improve more and more. We're getting more and more citations every week, so that every fact you have is really actually mentioned by a source that you can click on and verify. And that helps reduce hallucinations. We're seeing some folks kind of add fake citations into some editors, which is, I think, almost worse than having no citation at all, because once you have a citation, you can usually be quite sure and certain as a user that that fact is correct. You don't need to go check it as much. But when you add citations willy-nilly into your answer, and then you click on that and it actually doesn't verify the fact where you added the citation, I think that really hurts credibility of chatbots overall. Yeah.
So in your spare time, you start a venture capital firm, AIX. What are you thinking there? Like, why is it necessary to have another venture capital? I mean, there's a bunch of venture capital firms that change their websites from Web3 to, AI. You're obviously coming from a pretty legitimate place and starting it, but what made you, like, why'd you do that?
You mentioned one of the reasons already. A lot of VCs kind of go where the wind goes, and try to sort of anticipate that. I've been very excited about AI for almost 20 years, and after having worked on it in the research world for a good decade of my life, I want to make sure that the technology actually has positive influence and impact on the world. And for that to happen, it's an omni-use technology. So for that to happen, we should just spend more energy on the positive applications in healthcare, in biotech, in natural language understanding, and helping make people more efficient in their work so they can do more interesting work over time. That's sort of what motivates me with AIX. I also think it's helpful to build a venture fund that has actual deep domain expertise in AI. And I think we already, given our investing partners of Peter Beal, Chris Manning, and Anthony Goldblum, who are, Berkeley professor Peter Beal and roboticist and the most famous robotics researchers in the world, who also started a company. Chris Manning, the most cited NLP researcher in the world and Stanford professor, who has worked also. We've worked together on neural networks for NLP since the early days. And started the Human-Centered AI Institute at Stanford and advised many different startups, including my previous startups. And Anthony Goldblum, who started Kaggle, the biggest machine learning competition website. Like, it doesn't get any deeper in terms of AI expertise than that. And so we think that's helpful to invest and find really strong technical teams that also have some industry insights and want to disrupt an industry. And so that's sort of why we're doing it. Now, another reason to look at it is it's working really, really well. Like my angel portfolio has 18x in value ever since the acquisition of my first startup, MetaMind. I started investing in all my former interns and employees and friends and co-PhD students and so on. And several of those folks have done amazingly well. I've invested in Hugging Face in their seed round many years ago. And yeah, I mean, that's a very, very high multiple at this point. And we invested in a company called Athilas from Tanay Tendon. He was an intern with me twice, once at Stanford and at MetaMind. And his startup has now surpassed any of the startups I've ever built, also a unicorn. They're basically doing blood measurements at home. So it's something that, you look at these scans that come out, like, clearly a convolutional neural network can count these cells. You don't have to do that manually anymore, like Quest Diagnostics used to do for many years. And so he just ran with that idea and built out this whole at-home oncology care, and just like very impactful things. Another company, I could go on for a long time. I'll just do one more. But another company called Profluent, started by Ali Madani, one of my former team members at Salesforce Research, and we built what I mentioned in the very beginning, this large language model for protein sequences. And again, for those non-biologically sort of inclined, protein sequences proteins govern everything in the human body, in health, in sickness. COVID, that's a protein, like where that protein attaches into a human cell is all governed. All of those processes are governed by proteins. If we understand that language really well, we can do amazing things. And I think that will change all of humanity and disease handling. Finding new drugs and discovering new drugs in the next couple of years. And we'll have so much positive impact. I can't do all of these things myself.
Yeah, that's right.
I can try to, mentor and help and support amazing founders who are working on those ideas.
And what do you make of the sort of concept that there's hype in this AI investment cycle? And I kind of have a thesis that you have you read these headlines where some company will have raised $100 million and they have nothing yet. And maybe what's going on is that some of the later stage venture firms want to invest in AI, but there just aren't companies that have gone through the seed stage and, the stages to get big enough to need $100 million, but that's not going to stop them. So they're investing in just a person who's got a big story just so they can get money into it. And maybe it's not ready for late stage investing yet.
I think that's right. At AIX, we try to avoid companies that come in with sort of these insanely high valuations and multiples without having proven much of the technology. We stayed away from any $100 million seed round, because ultimately what that means is you have it doesn't mean that those companies cannot succeed, though there are not many examples of companies that raised this much money and then did succeed. Ultimately, you have in those situations a seed stage risk that stays the same. Most companies don't work out and don't find product market fit, but if they do succeed as an investor, you have a late stage growth kind of return, which isn't as high of a return. And so when you look at the expected value, we think the math just doesn't check out there. And not a lot of some of these people who have raised a lot don't have that much background in having actually worked and built novel AI systems. And really at that amount, what you're saying is we believe in their ability to do some research and build something truly novel. And I think OpenAI inspired a lot of people in that way of trying to say, well, if we just give enough money to the right people, we let them iterate and try some robotics, try some game playing, try a lot of other things, and at some point they're going to do something really truly amazing. And I think that can still happen, but it's a very special, very large group of people at OpenAI that have been at it and both startup building and AI research for many years.
So I'll wrap up here with a couple of questions, but what about AI should we be thinking about and excited about that we're not yet? I feel like every time a technology comes out, like when mobile devices had geolocation, everybody was doing check-ins, and there was an app called Foursquare, and you could win badges, and it was kind of cool. But then over time, what happened was somebody figured out that you could actually connect people who drive cars and need jobs with people who need rides, and here comes Uber. And that's really what you should have done with it. And it wasn't the obvious thing on day one. And I feel like we're in the obvious thing on day one stage. What can you imagine that we should be more excited about in AI that we're not really thinking about as much right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have to be a little bit careful here because we have a lot of ideas at U.com, and then maybe I talk about them too openly or something, but then I see competitors kind of launch them like just a few days before we're about ready to launch them too. Yeah. So, or sometimes a few weeks ahead of us, and we've been working on the feature for a while. So I think at a high level, biology and protein models is something that it's just a little less intuitive and less accessible to a lot of laymen who aren't deep in biology to see the impact of and be excited about and understand how they could contribute to it, right? When it comes to human language, we all use it. We all know it. It's actually, in a fun way, weird way, hard to have superhuman intelligence when it comes to language, because it's a human construct. Humans can only read so quickly, and we can multitask and listen to 5 different conversations. it's a sequential processing, whereas computers can do parallel processing and many conversations at the same time in the future. But I digress. Language, there are a lot of obvious things in language. I think the language of proteins is a massive one. I think we're now seeing it seep into more and more areas of the balance sheet of companies. There's marketing, there's service, there's sales, there's recruiting. There's a company, MoonHub, that we invested in also at AIX, that helps everyone kind of have a conversation with almost an AI recruiter, and help find great talent. So all of these different things on the balance sheet. Now we just saw in the last several weeks, like 4 different AI for accounting firms. So tons of interesting new work there. But you're right, in some ways, those are things that just make a ton of sense right now. I think where the longer term part is going is twofold. One, not just language, but also assistance, like having AI actually do things for you. There's a lot of interesting work in AI agents. It sort of feels a little bit like right now, it's not quite ready yet to really replace and give everyone a personal assistant who just knows everything. Be like, oh, when I booked that flight, I would rather sleep another like 45 minutes and pay $100 more, or no, I want the absolute cheapest flight. I'm okay with a 17-hour layover and then another red-eye flight after, and blah, blah, blah. Like, depending on who you are, it's not quite there yet. And so because of that, it hasn't replaced the interfaces that we're all used to. And, you have all these companies. Anyway, long story short, I think that's where the puck's going, but it's not there yet. And that's partially your question, why it's exciting. So assistant technology, biotech, and then the third big bucket is going to be physical systems, where as everything digital becomes cheaper and cheaper, I think at some point it's not too crazy to think that my plumber will make more than my marketer or software engineer, because those are just very digital, automatable jobs in the future. And so once there's enough money in physical jobs, then those will start to also have the right incentive structure to then see more automation.
Yeah. It's one we've seen recently in San Francisco, the emergence of Waymo and Cruise, self-driving cars. And the funny thing about it, the first time you saw someone with a cell phone, if you can remember that, it seemed crazy. And the first time you see a car moving around without a driver, it seems crazy. And by about the 10th time you see it, you're like, yeah, that's one of those cars, without a driver. So it's amazing how amazing technology can just become the way it goes.
That's right. Yeah. It's all about the baseline. It used to be that the absolute pinnacle of intelligence and AI was playing chess. And now it's just a little chess app on your phone. No one cares. No one's like interact with their chess app and be like, I am interacting with the uber human intelligence of this chess AI. It's just an app. And so, in some ways that's amazing. And we just, humans are all about their baselines and then comparing to what's new and what's different and how others are doing. And so that's part of why we keep striving towards more interesting things, and why when even many jobs of today won't be needed in the amount that they're needed now, maybe instead of 100 people doing something, you have 10 people that have all these AI superpowers with them. We'll find lots of interesting new weird things to do.
Yeah. Well, that's what Mark Andreessen always says, is that, technology comes along and it destroys 8 million jobs and creates 8.2 million new jobs. And, the 3% unemployment rate is really like a negative 10% and a positive, 13, however that math works. So, did you start, being interested in AI, do you read science fiction, or do you not read science fiction because the real science is better?
I do tend to read more nonfiction, just because there's so many interesting things to learn about the real world. I personally would love to learn more and read more on physics, chemistry, biology, but also just
in your spare time.
In my spare time. So I don't end up reading too many things. I do have to say that when I do read fiction, I do like science fiction. One of my favorite books in recent years on the nonfiction side was The Three-Body Problem.
Yeah.
Um, it's just one of the only sci-fi books I read, especially on the third book of the trilogy, where the author actually developed a world that was so far out from today that I had never even considered
Right.
things like it. And so that was just, it inspired me to want to learn more about physics again, because I felt like physics was very stuck as a field. You have to be incredibly smart, spend billions of dollars, and you come up with some hypothetical new particles, and you know, some of them maybe exist and some of them don't, and you have all these different multidimensional string theories, and it's not as interesting or like as like useful. Like we still can have sort of levitation for free, or like
Right.
superconductors, and like all of these different things. Like, and in theory we understand, but in practice we can execute on many things. And in that book, there's so many interesting ideas that really pushed my thinking and made me realize, wow, we could have so much more understanding and eventually control of the physical world than we currently do. And there's still so much to learn and figure out.
Well, I guess I'll finish with this then, kind of a sci-fi question. It's the sort of, will can AI kill us all? I saw this kind of interesting survey where they would ask just your average person about something, and then people who are experts in the field, and so what they thought. And so, for example, nuclear power, people who aren't experts in the field said it's very, very dangerous, nuclear power. And people who are experts in the field said it's actually not really that dangerous. And then when they asked a bunch of AI people if AI was very dangerous, could kill us all, most people said no, it's not that dangerous. But the experts said no, it's actually a real risk. So what do you think? Could AI just destroy us all while they're off building paper clips because someone put the wrong, decimal in the paperclip order?
So yeah, I could talk about that for a long time. I try to keep short, but keep it short. But I don't think AI can kill us all. I don't think there's any existential risk for it. I think some of that existential risk, it's fine to do some research, have a couple people think about cool sci-fi scenarios. It's a little bit like fiction writing, it's like cool to read it and it's interesting. They're like, oh, it's interesting thought experiment of like, what if we had time travel? What if we had invisibility cloaks? What could you do with like nano, robots that can move in your body and fix like your cancer cell and then just move out of your body again? And like some gray goo that can like shape shift. And like those are all like interesting thought experiments, and it's fun to think about them. But I do think they're somewhat distracting from real dangers of AI, which it is an omni-use technology. I mentioned earlier in our conversation, like it's only as good as we make it, and it's only as good as the systems, the frameworks, the people, the data sets, and so on that influence the AI. And the reason why AI isn't conscious or isn't basically building whatever it wants to build is that no government and no organization makes a lot of money by having AI do whatever it wants.
Right.
Like you need it to do the stuff that you want it to do. And so no one is even working on conscious, self-conscious AI systems or AI systems that set their own goals, which I would think is kind of a requirement of being defined as truly intelligent. If you just wrote through exactly what you're told to for every second of your life, I don't know if I would call that entity intelligent. So long story short, I think the existential risks are overblown. The real risks do exist. I mean, anyone can like try to get their hands on a hand grenade, connect it to a DJI drone, and then build an AI to say, drop yes, no, based on, the camera pointing down, and maybe it sees a tank. And if it sees a tank, it drops the hand grenade. And then it makes a mistake and drops the hand grenade on something that isn't a tank, right? And so those are real risks. And I think I think we need to actually work on is the hand grenade bit.
Yeah, right.
Don't give people access to hand grenade, and then the AI to drop the hand grenade is less of an issue. And so, I think we need to regulate AI when it comes to real applications that really touch human lives and have some really negative impact or positive impact, but then not equally distributed. And that should be something we strive for over time. But even there, maybe the positive impact is only available to some people, and then you work on making it better and better for everyone. And so, which is not uncommon for technology to first it was very expensive to sequence your own genome. They've only been something for billionaires, and now we can all do it. And so, sort of the path of technology often, and we just need to continue on that path. And so, regulate AI in areas where it makes sense. Don't let any self-driving car company just drive on the highway with no checks and balances. Don't let any AI developed drug or surgical robot just do those procedures like without a massive amounts of testing, right? But I think that's already what a lot of people do, and even the US, which is not strong in regulation, has a future-leaning FDA that works on those, transportation authorities that work on those, and some cities that are more future-leaning than others. And so I actually see a lot of positive there, and the risks are there, and they need to be regulated when they're serious, but they can be in many cases mitigated.
It's certainly an exciting time to be investing. How do people find you if they want to follow your thinking? Or, I mean, obviously they should check out you.com, but they want to follow what you're thinking, and how do they track you?
Yeah, that's right. At U.com, we try to actually make those AI innovations really easily accessible to millions of people. You can follow me on Twitter. Richarrd Socher is my Twitter handle, just my name. And shoot me an email if you can find it. It's not too hard to find. Socher.org is my website. And yeah, if you want to see me fly, I'm also on Instagram.
Excellent. All right. Oh, because you fly one of those wing things, right?
Paramotors. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this. This has been great.
Thank you.
All right. This has been the Something Measured podcast. Richarrd Socher, my guest. Talk to you next time.